What if I told you the exhaustion you feel right now isn't normal? And it isn't just aging, but a silent failure happening deep inside your cells. You wake up already tired, your energy crashes by mid-afternoon, your workouts feel heavier than they used to, and your mind struggles to stay sharp. You tell yourself it's stress, maybe sleep, maybe just getting older. But what if all of that is the symptom, not the cause? What if right now your body is slowly losing its ability to produce energy at the most fundamental level, and no one has ever explained why? Because this isn't about motivation. It's not about discipline. And it's definitely not about pushing harder. This is about a biological system inside you that is either working or quietly shutting down. And once it starts to decline, everything else follows: your strength, your recovery, your focus, even how fast you age. Most people don't notice it until it's already advanced, because it doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, subtly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize your body no longer responds the way it used to. And here's the part that should concern you. The longer this process continues unchecked, the harder it becomes to reverse. But here's what changed everything for me, and what you're about to understand in the next few minutes. This system is not permanently damaged. It can be reactivated, it can be rebuilt, and the triggers that control it are far more accessible than you've ever been told. Hello, I'm Dr. Nathaniel Li. I'm an emergency medicine physician and a medical researcher. After more than 30 years of studying how the body protects and heals itself and witnessing patients struggle with chronic diseases that I now believe, in many cases, could be treated far more easily than we've been taught, I began to question whether we've been missing something fundamental about the body's natural ability to heal, and what I discovered completely changed the way I think about disease. Now let me show you something that should make you stop and think. You've probably seen it before, maybe even in your own life. Two people, same age, similar background, similar lifestyle on the surface. One of them still wakes up with stable energy, moves with strength, recovers quickly, stays mentally sharp deep into the day. The other feels like they're constantly catching up. Slower morning. Energy crashes that hit like a wall. Workouts that take more out of them than they give back. And a kind of fatigue that doesn't fully go away no matter how much they rest. So the question becomes unavoidable: what's actually separating these two people? Because if you look closely, it's not willpower. The second person isn't lazy. They're trying, they're pushing. In many cases, they're doing more, not less. And it's not simply age either. I've treated patients in their 60s with more stable energy than people in their late 30s. So if it's not effort and it's not time, then what is it? This is exactly the point where most explanations fall apart. We're told vague answers: metabolism slows down, hormones change, it's just part of life. But those explanations don't tell you what's actually happening inside your body, at the level where energy is created, regulated, and sustained. And this is where I started to question everything I thought I understood. Because when you look beneath the surface, past habits, past routines, past assumptions, you begin to see a very different pattern emerge. The real difference isn't how hard these individuals are trying, it's how efficiently their cells are producing and managing energy. And once you understand that, everything starts to connect. The fatigue, the slower recovery, the mental fog, even the way the body responds or stops responding to effort. Which brings us to a deeper, far more important question: what is controlling that system? And why does it break down so differently from one person to another? And it's right at this point that Dr. Nathaniel Li began looking deeper into a level of biology most people never even realize exists. What Dr. Nathaniel Li discovered at that deeper level changes the entire way you understand fatigue, aging, and energy. Because at the center of all of this is something most people have heard of, but almost no one truly understands: your mitochondria. These are often described as the powerhouses of your cells, but that description is incomplete, almost misleading in its simplicity. Mitochondria are not just producing energy, they are controlling how your body lives, adapts, and ages. Every movement you make, every thought you process, every time your body repairs itself after stress or injury. This all depends on how well your mitochondria are functioning. They generate ATP, yes, but they also regulate metabolic efficiency, inflammation, cellular repair, and even how resilient your body feels under pressure. And when these systems begin to decline, the effects don't show up all at once. They appear gradually. You start to notice that your energy isn't as stable. Your workouts feel more taxing. Recovery takes longer. Your mental clarity fades faster than it used to. And because these changes happen slowly, you adapt to them, you normalize them. But underneath that adaptation, something very real is happening. Your mitochondria are becoming less efficient. They're producing less energy, generating more internal stress, and struggling to keep up with the demands you place on your body every day. And here's the critical part. This is not just about feeling tired. This is about how your body is aging at the cellular level. Because the same process that produces energy inside your mitochondria also produces byproducts that can damage them over time. If that damage isn't properly managed, you don't just lose energy, you lose function. Muscle performance declines, metabolic control becomes unstable, the entire system begins to slow down. So when you feel that persistent fatigue, that slower recovery, that gradual loss of sharpness, it's not random. It's a reflection of what's happening deep inside your cells. But what truly caught Dr. Nathaniel Li's attention wasn't the fact that mitochondria decline, it was the realization that this process is not fixed. Because once you understand how these structures work, you also begin to see something far more powerful. Your body already has the ability to repair, replace, and rebuild them. And that changes the conversation completely. But the part that fascinated Dr. Nathaniel Li the most was not that mitochondria weaken over time, it was how your body can actually build them back again. To understand how this rebuilding process works, you don't need to memorize complex biology, but you do need to see the system clearly. Because what Dr. Nathaniel Li uncovered is not random. It's a coordinated network, and at the center of it are three key mechanisms that quietly decide whether your body is declining or recovering. The first is something called AMP-K, and the simplest way to think about it is this. It's your body's internal energy sensor. When your cells start running low on energy, AMP-K switches on like an emergency signal. Imagine your phone dropping to 10% battery. Instantly, it goes into power-saving mode, shuts down non-essential processes, and redirects resources to keep the system alive. Your body does something very similar. When AMP-K is activated, it doesn't just conserve energy, it initiates a cleanup process. Damaged components inside your cells are broken down and recycled. And most importantly, it specifically targets weak or dysfunctional mitochondria and removes them. This is the first step, clearing out what's no longer working. But clearing space isn't enough. Once that happens, your body needs to rebuild. And that's where the second mechanism comes in PGC1 alpha. You can think of this as the master switch for mitochondrial construction. When PGC1 alpha is activated, your cells receive a very clear signal: start building new mitochondria, not repairing the old ones, but creating entirely new, more efficient energy systems. It's like replacing outdated machinery in a factory with newer, more powerful versions that can handle higher demand with less strain. And here's what's critical: without this signal, no matter how many raw materials your body has, the rebuilding process simply doesn't begin. But even if you clear out the damaged mitochondria and build new ones, there's still one more problem to solve. Because the environment inside your cells is not neutral. It's constantly exposed to stress, especially from the very process of producing energy. And that's where the third mechanism comes in NRF2. This is your body's internal defense system. When NRF2 is activated, it turns on the production of specialized antioxidant enzymes that protect your mitochondria from damage at the source. If AMP-K is the cleanup crew and PGC1 alpha is the construction team, then NRF2 is the shield that protects everything you've rebuilt. Without it, the system deteriorates just as quickly as it's repaired. And what makes this entire network so powerful is not just that these systems exist, but that they are deeply interconnected. When one is activated, it influences the others. Cleanup leads to rebuilding. Protection supports longevity. And over time, the entire system begins to reinforce itself. This is how the body restores energy from the inside out. And if these mechanisms sound complex, almost out of reach, what Dr. Nathaniel Li discovered next is even more unexpected. What makes this system truly powerful, and what most people completely miss, is that these mechanisms do not operate in isolation. They are not separate switches you turn on one at a time. They function as an integrated loop, constantly influencing each other. When AMK is activated, it doesn't just initiate cleanup. It also sends a signal upstream that supports the activation of PGC1 alpha, which means the very act of clearing out damaged mitochondria begins to prepare the system for rebuilding. At the same time, that activation increases cellular sensitivity to stress signals, which can stimulate NRF2, the protective pathway that stabilizes the environment inside your cells. And once NRF2 is active, something critical happens. The oxidative stress that normally damages mitochondria begins to decrease. That reduction in internal damage allows newly formed mitochondria to survive longer and function more efficiently, which in turn feeds back into the system, improving energy output and reinforcing the signal that the cell is in a state worth maintaining. This is not a linear process. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. Cleanup leads to rebuilding. Rebuilding improves efficiency. Efficiency reduces stress. Reduced stress protects the system, and that protection allows the cycle to continue. When this loop is inactive, your body slowly loses ground. But when it's activated, even modest changes can begin to compound over time. And this is where everything shifts, because at that point, you're no longer trying to boost energy in the temporary sense. You're restoring the system that creates energy in the first place. And when that system begins to function the way it was designed to, the effects are not isolated. They show up everywhere: how you move, how you think, how you recover, how you age. And when this loop is fully engaged, the question is no longer, do you have enough energy? It becomes something far more important: what level is your body actually operating at? Now here's where everything becomes practical, and also where most people either unlock real change or completely miss it. Because these mechanisms we've been talking about, AMPK, PGC1 alpha, NRF2, they are not abstract. They respond to signals. And one of the most powerful ways you send those signals is through what you eat, but not in the way you've been taught. This isn't about calories or macros or generic healthy foods. This is about specific compounds that interact directly with the systems we just broke down. And the first one is something that surprises almost everyone: tart cherries. Not sweet cherries, not cherry-flavored, anything specifically Montmorency tart cherries. In a controlled trial, individuals consuming these cherries showed a measurable increase in mitochondrial density inside skeletal muscle tissue. That's not a feeling, that's a structural change. The mechanism traces back to a compound called cyanidin 3 glucoside, which directly activates AMPK. In simple terms, it tells your body, start cleaning up and preparing to rebuild. But here's where most people get it wrong. They buy sweet cherries or processed juice with added sugar and expect the same result. It doesn't work. The compound profile is completely different. And when that signal isn't present, the entire chain reaction we talked about never begins. Now contrast that with something far less common, but even more targeted: spirulina. This isn't just a superfood label. Spirulina contains phycocyanin, a pigment protein that has been shown to directly upregulate PGC1 alpha expression, the very switch responsible for mitochondrial creation. In one study, participants taking around 3 grams daily didn't just show biochemical changes, they improved measurable oxygen utilization, which reflects real mitochondrial function. This is your body not just cleaning up, but actively building new energy systems. But there's a critical detail most people overlook. Heat destroys this compound. Mix it into hot drinks, and you lose the effect almost entirely. And then there's moringa leaf, which operates on a completely different layer. While the first two initiate activity, moringa protects it. Rich in isothiocyanates, it activates NRF2, triggering your body's internal antioxidant defense network. That means less damage, longer-lasting mitochondria, and a more stable internal environment. Think of it as reinforcing the structure you just rebuilt. But again, preparation matters. High heat degrades these compounds, and extracts don't replicate the same effect as the whole leaf matrix. What makes this next one particularly interesting is that it doesn't create or protect it, optimizes longevity within the system. Black sesame seeds contain lignans like sesamin, which upregulate SIRT1, a protein deeply involved in mitochondrial quality control. This enhances the function of PGC1 alpha and supports cellular cleanup independently. In practical terms, it helps your mitochondria function better for longer. But white sesame seeds don't deliver the same result. The processing removes key compounds that drive this effect. Then there's something far more accessible but often underestimated: green kiwi fruit. In a controlled study, regular intake significantly reduced markers of mitochondrial DNA damage. That means the system isn't just working, it's being preserved. You're slowing the rate at which your energy system breaks down over time. And here's the detail: most people ignore the skin contains a much higher concentration of protective compounds than the flesh. Peel it off, and you lose a major part of the benefit. Finally, there's an ingredient almost no one associates with energy metabolism: cardamom. But its active compound, 1,8-cineol, has been shown to activate AMPK in a way that mimics the effects of caloric restriction. In other words, it creates a metabolic signal similar to fasting without actually fasting. But here's the catch: it must be freshly ground. This compound is volatile, and once it evaporates, the effect is gone. Pre-ground spice sitting on a shelf for months is functionally useless in this context. And when you step back and look at all of this together, a pattern becomes clear. Each of these foods is not just healthy. Each one is sending a very specific instruction to your body: clean, build, protect, sustain. But according to Dr. Nathaniel Li, the real issue is not how much you're eating. It's what signals you're sending to your body every single day. And this is exactly where most people fail, not because the system doesn't work, but because the signals they're sending are either inconsistent, incorrect, or simply too weak to trigger any real change. The first mistake is using the wrong version of the right food. You've already seen this with tart cherries. People reach for sweet varieties, processed juices, or flavored products, assuming they're equivalent. They're not. The active compounds that drive AMPK activation simply aren't there in meaningful amounts. The same pattern shows up with sesame choosing white instead of black, or with cardamom that's been pre-ground and sitting on a shelf for months. On the surface, it looks right. Biologically, it's ineffective. The second mistake is expectation. People hear that these mechanisms can be activated within days, and they assume they should feel a difference immediately. But that's not how this works. Gene expression can change in 24 to 72 hours, but building enough functional mitochondria to impact how you actually feel takes weeks. When nothing dramatic happens after a few days, they stop, not realizing that the process had already started, and they walked away before it could produce a visible result. The third mistake is how these foods are used: eating spirulina, overcooking moringa, combining cardamom with dairy in a way that reduces absorption. These details may seem minor, but at the molecular level, they determine whether the signal reaches your cells or disappears before it has any effect. And finally, one of the most common issues I see in practice is the assumption that supplements can replace whole food. They can support the process, but they do not replicate the full biological effect of the complete food matrix. And when those interactions are missing, the outcome is often weaker than expected. And this is why so many people come to the conclusion that their body isn't responding. when in reality, they've never truly activated the process in the first place. Now, if you've stayed with me this far, here's where everything comes together in a way that is both simple and surprisingly powerful. Because you don't need to rely on a single food or a single pathway to create change. What you're really doing is coordinating signals, activating multiple parts of the system at the same time. And when that happens, the effect is no longer isolated. It becomes synergistic. This is what I often describe as the build, clean, protect approach. You use tart cherries or cardamom to activate AMPK, the signal that initiates cleanup and prepares your cells to remove damaged mitochondria. At the same time, you introduce spirulina to directly stimulate PGC1-alpha, triggering the construction of new, more efficient mitochondria. And alongside that, you include moringa or foods rich in protective compounds to activate NRF2, stabilizing the environment so those new structures can survive and function properly. You're not just turning on one switch, you're aligning the entire system. And when these signals are repeated consistently, your body begins to recognize a pattern. It adapts. It reinforces the process. Over time, the changes compound, energy becomes more stable, recovery improves. The system starts to behave differently, not because you forced it, but because you gave it the conditions it needed to function the way it was designed to. This is not a temporary boost. This is a shift in how your body produces and manages energy at the cellular level. This is not a hack. This is how Dr. Nathaniel Li describes a system finally operating the way it was meant to. Now, this is where I need you to stay grounded because this part determines whether you trust the process or walk away too early. The timeline for change is real, but it doesn't always match what you expect. When these pathways AMPK, PGC1-alpha, NRF2 are activated, the first thing that changes is not how you feel. It's what's happening at the genetic and cellular level. Within 48 to 72 hours, your cells can begin shifting gene expression. Signals are sent. Cleanup begins. The system starts preparing for repair, but you won't feel that yet. Because building new mitochondria, functional, efficient ones that actually impact your energy, takes time. In most cases, it's a 4 to 8 week process of consistent signaling before you notice real, measurable changes in stamina, recovery, and mental clarity. And this is where most people lose the opportunity. They start, they don't feel immediate results, and they assume nothing is happening. But what they don't realize is that the process had already begun beneath the surface. They leave before the system has time to respond. And from my perspective, after decades of clinical observation, this is one of the most common patterns I see. People don't fail because their body can't change. They fail because they stop before the change becomes visible. And more often than not, people give up right before their body is about to transform. And when you step back and look at everything we've covered, the picture becomes surprisingly clear. This was never about chasing quick energy or relying on temporary fixes that fade within hours. This is about understanding the system that determines how your body creates, manages, and sustains energy at its core. Your mitochondria are not static. They are constantly responding to the signals you send through what you eat, how you move, how you recover, and how consistently you repeat those patterns. Over time, those signals either reinforce decline or they initiate repair. And the difference between those two outcomes is not dramatic in any single moment. It's built quietly, day after day, through small decisions that accumulate into something much larger. From what I've seen over decades in both clinical practice and research, the body is far more adaptable than most people realize. It is not waiting to fail, it is waiting for the right conditions to function the way it was designed to. And once those conditions are in place, the system begins to respond in ways that feel almost unexpected. Energy stabilizes, recovery improves. The body starts to feel more capable again, not because something external fixed it, but because the internal system was finally supported. According to Dr. Nathaniel Li, your body is not working against you. It is responding to what you consistently do every day. If this changed the way you think about your energy and your health, take a moment to save this video so you can come back to it when you need it, and subscribe to the channel if you want more clear, evidence-based insights like this, because the more you understand how your body actually works, the more control you have over the direction it takes. And maybe the most important question to leave you with is this: if your body has the ability to rebuild itself, what would happen if you finally gave it the chance?